I was driving on a winding road late at night. There were no other cars around, and the surrounding area was completely deserted. I was carefully following the speed limit, even though I was sure no one was around to monitor me. But suddenly, red and white flashing lights appeared in my rearview mirror. My heart skipped a beat as I realized I was being pulled over. I pulled over to the side of the road and waited. The man who approached my car looked like an officer, but something about him seemed off. His uniform was all black, and his vest, though resembling a police vest, didn't have any clear police markings. The badge he wore didn't say police either. Instead, it said Criminal Task Force. He asked me for my license and registration, but I was immediately suspicious. I questioned him, asking why I was being pulled over. He didn't give me a clear answer and kept insisting that I hand over my documents. I knew enough about traffic stops to realize that his refusal to explain himself wasn't normal. When I asked for his badge number, he avoided the question and claimed he didn't need to provide it. That's when alarm bells went off in my head. His car only had red and white lights, no blue. I couldn't be sure, but I remembered that real police cars usually have blue lights. As he continued to pressure me, even demanding that I step out of the car, I became more and more convinced that something was very wrong. I told him I wasn't comfortable and asked for a supervisor to come to the scene. His tone became harsher, and he started raising his voice, repeating that I needed to get out of the car. I refused, rolling up my window slightly. That's when he tried to forcefully open my door, yelling at me to cooperate. Fear surged through me. I quickly started my car, put it into drive, and sped off, hearing him shout behind me. My heart was pounding as I raced away, praying I was doing the right thing. The car with the flashing lights started chasing me. I immediately called 911, explaining that I believed I was being followed by a fake police officer. The dispatcher remained calm, asking for my location and advising me to head toward the nearest police station. I could see the vehicle still following me in my rearview mirror, its lights flashing ominously. Halfway to the station, the car behind me suddenly turned off at an intersection and disappeared into the night. I felt a wave of relief. My suspicion had been right. All along I had encountered a fake cop. When I finally arrived at the police station, an officer was already waiting for me. I told him everything that had happened, describing the man and his vehicle. He took my contact information, and after a few more minutes, I was free to go. Driving away from the station, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to real danger. Trusting my instincts had saved me from whatever might have happened if I had gotten out of the car that night. One weekend, my partner and I decided to spend a few days at our vacation home to relax. The house was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by dense trees, and was the perfect retreat from city life. We drove along the winding road and finally reached the tranquil clearing where the house stood. In the afternoon, we relaxed on the deck, enjoying the serene surroundings. However, as evening approached, we began to hear faint footsteps in the distance. At first, we thought it might be wild animals and didn't pay much attention. But as the sounds grew closer, they seemed to encircle the house. Feeling uneasy, we quickly went inside and locked all doors and windows. I peered through the curtains but saw nothing unusual outside. Just as we were starting to unwind, a sudden knock at the door startled us. A voice from outside called out, "Open the door, it's the police." We received a report of a possible break-in. We exchanged confused glances. The area was so remote that the nearest neighbor was far away, making the report unlikely. I asked, "Why are you here? Who reported this?" The voice outside repeated, "Please open the door, sir." I peered through the window but saw no police cars. I grew more suspicious and told my partner, "I don't think this is a real cop." I then called out, "I don't see any police cars outside, so I'm not opening the door." There was a brief silence before the knocking resumed, more forceful. Realizing we might be dealing with imposters, I grabbed a self-defense tool and warned through the door, "Leave now or I will take action." The knocking stopped, and after a few moments, the footsteps retreated, fading into the darkness of the surrounding forest. We didn't dare go outside and remained on high alert for the rest of the night. The next morning, the sun cast a peaceful light over the cabin, but the night's events left us feeling uneasy. We decided to leave immediately and reported the incident to the authorities. Since then, my family and I have returned to the cabin a few times, but thankfully, the imposter never appeared again. I'm 29 years old and live alone. On weekends, I come to my house in a quiet rural area to escape the busy city life I have grown tired of. The property is large, with no neighbors nearby, creating an eerie atmosphere, the kind you might see in a horror movie. Though the town has a low crime rate due to its small population, I enjoy the isolation and come here to be alone, away from the stresses of work and people. One Friday evening, after arriving at the house, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a man with a clipboard stood there, trying to sell me a security system. He mentioned recent break-ins in the area, although I hadn't heard anything about them. He was persistent, asking who I lived with and urging me to consider his offer, but I declined, saying I lived alone and didn't need it. Despite my lack of interest, he insisted on taking my phone number, offering to waive the installation fee. I gave it to him, and he left. Later that night, while I was watching TV, there was a knock at the door again, but this time it was 11 p.m. an unusually late hour for visitors. The knocking continued, but I ignored it. Eventually, I got up and asked who it was, but there was no response. I wasn't going to open the door at that time of night. I shouted through the door that I wasn't interested and had a gun, hoping to scare them off. The knocking finally stopped. Not long after, my phone rang. The caller ID said 911 Emergency Services. Confused, I answered. A man's voice asked if I was home and claimed there had been a report of a crime in the area. He said police officers were outside and needed to ask me some questions. Suspicious, I asked him to have the officers come to the window, but he refused. Something didn't feel right, so I hung up. I immediately called the real 911 to confirm if the call was legitimate. The operator assured me it wasn't and advised me to lock the doors. Just then, I heard someone trying to force open the back door, followed by loud bangs. I told the operator, who said police would arrive within minutes. I yelled at whoever was outside, threatening them, but they continued trying to break in. I glanced out the window and saw two masked men attempting to kick down the door. When they noticed I was on the phone, they fled into the night. Minutes later, the real police arrived and searched the property. One officer stayed outside for hours to ensure my safety. I realized the man who had come earlier was likely scouting the house, planning the break-in. I'm done answering the door to strangers from now on.